Afghanistan, a land where empires have clashed and civilizations have crumbled. But before the Soviet tanks, before the Taliban, and before decades of war, there was once a king, Mohammad Zahir Shah, who ruled a united and peaceful Afghanistan. His reign began with promise and ended in exile. And what followed was a chain of revolutions, coups, and invasions that would destroy the very idea of an Afghan monarchy, and plunge the nation into endless turmoil. This is the story of how the Afghan throne fell, and how a kingdom turned into a battlefield. In 1933, when King Nadir Shah was assassinated, his 19-year-old son Zahir Shah ascended the throne. Afghanistan, at that time, was still recovering from the turbulence of the early 20th century, from Amanullah Khan's failed modernization to tribal revolts and foreign interference. Zahir Shah's reign, however, would mark a period of relative stability and neutrality. He surrounded himself with capable advisors, especially his cousin and later Prime Minister, Mohammad Daoud Khan. During the 1940 and 1950, Afghanistan maintained a delicate balance between the two Cold War powers, the United States and the Soviet Union. It accepted aid from both sides, building roads, schools, and hospitals with Soviet engineers on one side, and American dollars on the other. Kabul became a symbol of cautious modernization, a cosmopolitan city where Afghan men and women studied together at Kabul University, where Western tourists visited freely, and where Afghan artists, poets, and musicians flourished. This was Zahir Shah's Afghanistan, conservative but open, proud but peaceful. A rare golden age, though one resting on fragile foundations. By the 1960s, the winds of change began to blow. Afghanistan's economy, though modernizing, remained deeply dependent on foreign aid. Unemployment was rising, corruption was spreading, and the royal family's internal rivalries were growing more visible. King Zahir Shah introduced a new constitution in 1964, aimed at transitioning the country into a constitutional monarchy. It abolished the prime minister's position held by his cousin Daoud Khan, allowed for free elections, and opened the way for a new parliament. It was a bold experiment, the first time Afghans were asked to participate in democratic governance. But in reality, it created confusion. The political parties were weak and divided, ranging from Islamists inspired by Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood to Marxists inspired by Moscow. The parliament was paralyzed by ideological infighting, while the king remained aloof, avoiding direct involvement. In the shadows, radical ideologies were taking root, both on the left and the right. And the man most dissatisfied of all was Mohammad Daoud Khan, who had been sidelined by the very constitution his cousin introduced. In July 1973, while King Zahir Shah was abroad in Italy for medical treatment, Daoud Khan seized his chance. He staged a bloodless coup, backed by military officers sympathetic to the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, PDPA, the country's main communist party. The monarchy was abolished, and Afghanistan was declared a republic. Daoud Khan became the first president of Afghanistan, promising modernization, social reform, and independence from both superpowers. Zahir Shah, now deposed, accepted his fate quietly. He remained in exile in Rome, never returning to power. Afghanistan's 200-year-old monarchy had ended, not with a war, but with silence. But the coup that promised stability would instead open the floodgates of chaos. Daoud Khan soon realized that the same communists who helped him seize power were not willing to share it. He began to sideline the PDPA, arresting its leaders and trying to steer a more nationalist course. But by then, the communist ideology had already penetrated the army, universities, and bureaucracy. In April 1978, Daoud's rule ended in a violent coup known as the Saur Revolution. The PDPA seized power, assassinated Daoud Khan and his family, and established the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. Under Nur Muhammad Turki and later Hafizullah Amin, the new communist regime embarked on radical reforms, land redistribution, secular education, and women's emancipation. But these reforms were enforced brutally, alienating the countryside, tribal elders, and religious leaders. Resistance began almost immediately. The Mujahideen, Islamic fighters, rose up in rebellion across the provinces. By late 1979, Afghanistan was in full civil war. When internal power struggles erupted within the PDPA itself, the Soviet Union decided to intervene, sending in troops in December 1979. The communist experiment had unleashed a storm, one that would drag global powers into Afghanistan's tragic orbit. For 10 long years, Afghanistan became the Cold War's fiercest battleground. The Soviets, determined to keep the communist regime in power, fought against a growing Islamic resistance, the Mujahideen, who were backed by the United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and China. Villages were bombed, cities were destroyed, and millions of Afghans fled as refugees, mostly to Pakistan and Iran. The monarchy was now a distant memory. Afghanistan had become a land of warlords, militias, and foreign proxies. In 1989, the Soviet Union withdrew, leaving behind a devastated country. But the end of foreign occupation didn't bring peace. Instead, it unleashed a new civil war, this time between the Mujahideen factions themselves. From 1989 to 1996, Afghanistan tore itself apart. The Mujahideen leaders, who once fought side by side, now fought each other for control of Kabul. The capital was reduced to rubble, thousands were killed. Amid this chaos, a new movement emerged, the Taliban. Formed in the early 1990s in Kandahar, the Taliban was composed largely of young Afghan refugees educated in Pakistan's religious schools. They promised to end warlordism, restore law and order, and enforce a strict interpretation of Islamic law. Led by Mullah Muhammad Omar, they gained popular support for bringing security to war-torn areas. By 1996, the Taliban captured Kabul and declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They hung former President Najibullah and imposed their rule over most of the country. For many Afghans, it felt like the monarchy's fall had come full circle, from modernization and democracy to fundamentalism and fear. Decades after his exile, the aging King Zahir Shah watched Afghanistan suffering from Rome. When the Taliban were overthrown in 2001 after the US-led invasion, there were calls for the king's return as a symbol of unity. He was flown back to Kabul in 2002, greeted by crowds who remembered his peaceful rule. But Afghanistan had changed beyond recognition. The monarchy was not restored, instead, a new republic was formed under Hamid Karzai, while Zahir Shah was given the ceremonial title of Father of the Nation. He passed away in 2007, marking the end of a royal legacy that had once bound Afghanistan together. The fall of the Afghan monarchy was not just the end of a royal family, it was the end of an era. Zahir Shah's Afghanistan, once neutral and peaceful, was torn apart by coups, ideologies, and foreign invasions. Each new regime, from Daoud Khan's republic to the PDPA's communism, from the Mujahideen to the Taliban, tried to reshape Afghanistan in its own image, but none could restore its unity. What began as a coup in 1973 became a cycle of power and collapse that still echoes today. In the ruins of palaces and the memories of its people, the Afghan kingdom lives on, as a reminder of what Afghanistan once was, and what it might have been.